Okay, so we are going to kind of shift gears now away from the brain and into the spinal cord. Right, so really we can think of the spinal cord almost as an extension of the brain that's just now coming out of the skull. Right, and so the spinal cord is actually still covered in those same meningeal layers, right? So it has we can see a dura and arachnoid, right? So that's this thin line here. That thicker border is basically the dura and arachnoid mater, and we have the pia mater, right, which is pressed directly against the spinal cord, right? So we have our arachnoid and our pia mater, and so all of this in here, right, is filled with cerebral spinal fluid. Right, and so we get our cerebral spinal fluid, right, that protective fluid. It's going to flow all the way through the spinal cord, or on the outside of the spinal cord there. So the spinal cord proper is actually quite interesting. The spinal cord itself is pretty cool. So what I will do, including with this video, there's an additional video that was recorded by another faculty member here at York, and I will post her screencast. It's like a 6 or 7 minute screencast that explains the spinal cord and meninge situation in more detail. But I'll do a little bit of explaining here, and you can watch that video if you want maybe additional information. But okay, so let's discuss the kind of the spinal cord and what is actually happening down here. So the spinal cord itself, right, actually only runs to about the L1, L2 level. So that's right about here, right? We have L1, L2. So remember, that's the first and second lumbar vertebrae. So between those two vertebrae, we can see in this diagram, right, it comes to a little point here. So that point right here is actually the end of the spinal cord proper, as we'll call it, right? And that end point is called the conus medullaris, right? And so that's where the spinal cord really comes to an end. However, right, we do know that our nerves don't end at L1, L2, right? And so between every vertebrae, we have a nerve pairing coming out. So we have a nerve pairing coming out each on the left and right side in between every single vertebrae. And so when we get to L1, L2, right, even though the spinal cord ends, right, we end up with basically the dura and arachnoid mater continuing on. So you can see that continuation of the dura and arachnoid space, right? And what you end up with is all of that space is still filled with our cerebral spinal fluid, right? And so our spinal nerves, right, are basically just hanging out here, right, in this fluid now. So they've exited the spinal cord at the conus medullaris, right, and they continue down where they have to exit, right? So if, for example, if we have to exit down here at the sacral level, right, and so this nerve here is going to just be an extension of what's been coming down from the spinal cord. Now that bit of pia mater, right? So remember that thin layering that was on the directly in contact with the spinal cord. So let me clear away some of this. So that actually doesn't entirely go away, and so we can see what happens is that that pia mater turns into what is called the phylum terminale, right? So this phylum terminale is basically an extension of the pia mater. You can kind of see that, that thick, kind of that different color there. So that comes down and actually anchors all the way to the coccyx there, right? So it's going to come down and basically be an anchor point. So essentially it anchors the spinal cord here. So all of these nerves, as well as that from the spinal cord here that is extending down, right? So it's just going to give it a little bit more stability, so there's not as much kind of free moving material within here. Right. So that's essentially how the kind of spinal cord works and what happens when it ends. So we have these kind of these bundles, these like spaghetti-like nerves. It's actually called the cauda equina, which means horse's tail. Right. So it looks like a loose bundle of these nerves that still have to exit out of their respective location. Right, and so they're still contained within this, the pia, the dura and arachnoid mater, which essentially closes down around, and it's still contained with the cerebrospinal fluid. So the fluid itself, right, is going to basically hold the cauda equina in place and guide those nerves to where they need to be, with the phylum terminale anchoring the spinal cord to the coccyx, so to the skeleton itself. Like I said, there'll be another video posted which might help explain some of this a little bit better. All right. So a little bit now of the internal structure of the spinal cord. And so what we'll see is actually opposite of the brain, in the sense that we still have gray and white matter. However, the gray matter is now on the inside, right? And the white matter is on the outer portion. And so essentially, right, the white matter are the axons coming in and out, and we see the gray matter are the cell bodies that are relaying that information. And so the gray matter, right, actually kind of makes this like a butterfly type of shape, right, with a way to an easier way to distinguish between anterior and posterior. Or you might see that as ventral and dorsal. So dorsal being posterior. You can think of that like a dorsal fin would be on the back of a dolphin, shark, whatever, and then anterior is ventral. So you might see that in some textbooks or even some of the mastering stuff. Right, and so again, how what this works, we'll see this a little bit in the next slide, is basically information comes into the spinal cord from the posterior aspect and leaves through the anterior. Right. So just to have another look at this, first off, just to kind of show some neat pictures. Right, on the right hand side here, we have basically a cadaveric specimen of the different regions of the spinal cord. Right, so you can see the spinal cord running down here. We can see the different nerves, right, exiting the spinal cord there. that's in the thoracic or cervical. You can see it again in the thoracic. And then down here, right at the lumbar region, so we can see like that conus medullaris. So that's where the spinal cord is going to end proper, right? We see the filum terminalis, so that's that piece, that bit of pia mater that's continuing on down, right? And then we can see with the cauda equina, so those loose bundles of nerves that are still exiting the bottom of the spinal cord, and they're making their way to their final destination. So there's just a kind of a real life view of what this looks like. And so what we see with the spinal nerves, so this is a little bit more of the kind of the peripheral nervous system. Now we're talking about these spinal nerves, but the information, right, is going to come from the dorsal or the posterior side. So this is posterior, that's anterior, right? Again, we know that's anterior. Our spinous process will tell us that's posterior. So what we have is information, right? So information being the signal, so the action potential, right? That electrical nerve impulse is going to come in from a sensory nerve, right? And so some signal is going to be picked up, say it's from the outside environment. Right? So for example, let's say you place your finger on or you step on a tack, right? So you're going to step down, you step on either a nail or a tack. So you're going to get this sensory input information that's going to basically say, ow, I stepped on a tack, right? So you step down, you're going to get these pain receptors that are going to send information to the posterior aspect of the spinal column here, and spinal cord, right? So this is where information will then be sent up the spinal cord to the brain for some processing. It'll send the information back down, and it will send the information out through the anterior side that will basically as the response. So the input will be the sensory. You step down, the integration part will say, ouch, that hurts, let's move our foot. So then the output is going to be telling your leg muscles, right, to lift off of the nail that you just stepped on. Right, so information flows through the back, so you can even see what this looks like here. So it comes into the posterior and exits from the anterior.